Hello, welcome back to another episode of Living Out the Gospel, all about how do we live out our faith in every day, not just on a Sunday, through our work and through every sphere of life. And today I have Ian Johnston, a good friend of mine on. Thanks for being here, Ian.
It's good to be here.
Yeah, so also a fellow member of Christ Fellowship Church in Roswell, and also a fellow bandmate playing the djembe.
Yep.
And about how long have you done that for?
Since probably late middle school, I started with like drum kit. It's the feet and the hands never got in sync to each other. I can do the hands, but when you add in the feet, the hands want to follow. So doing percussion over a kit drum was sort of a better fit for me.
Okay.
Yep.
Very cool. And then totally different from that, but the fun question for today is, was there a Christmas tradition your family had growing up or still do today that you especially enjoyed?
Ooh. Okay, I'm going to split that into two. Because we have one that we still do and one that was sort of my favorite, but we don't still do. So I'll start with the one that was my favorite. So we would open a gift on Christmas Eve. We'd go to the candlelight service, then come home, and we were kids. We were restless, and to placate us and make sure we'd actually fall asleep and expend some of that energy, we were allowed to open one gift. But this was usually the Aunt Catherine gift. Okay. My Aunt Catherine, it's not actually my aunt. Actually, I think the technical is she's my great aunt, but she was always Aunt Catherine.
Okay.
To give you an idea, her wardrobe consists largely of orange and purple. She spent most of her time doing like art projects and stuff like that, painting, going over the place. So she's a character. And her gifts were either wicked cool or just completely oddball. So opening up the gifts was always like there was a real suspense to what you were going to get in the gift. So that was always fun. As we grew up, part of our family giving is extended family. We don't do adults, we just do kids. So as we grew older, we no longer had the Aunt Catherine gift. And also, because of things, I'm not able to be up with my family for Christmas as much. So opening things up on Christmas Eve doesn't happen because we usually celebrate Christmas with the family around Thanksgiving because that's when I'm able to get up there. The other tradition that we still sort of do and that I fondly remember is driving around for the lights. Lights are a huge thing for me for Christmas because up in New England, you get your sunrise in the winter, 8 a.m., 9 a.m., and then it usually sets around 4 to 5 p.m., and it is wicked dark in the winter, cold, all the trees are just bare, but having those lights, having those warm lights, and people would go all out. So we would just be driving at night and it'd be like, oh, hey, there's some lights there. We got time. Let's go drive through that neighborhood and just go look at all the lights around and poke around. And it was really nice, especially coming home because the school bus stop, I lived on a dead-end unpaved hill, and the school bus would drop us off at the bottom of the hill. And then we'd have to trudge all the way up through the snow. And seeing those lights at the end of the driveway when I got up there, it's like, okay, it's going to be warm in there. I can see the warmth. So, yeah, those are my two favorite sort of memories and traditions from Christmas.
Gotcha. Well, I identify both of those because, I remember the same thing growing up. We have one present you could open Christmas Eve, so I definitely remember that. Although mine was definitely not as unique as on of like, oh, who knows what kind of interesting craft thing this will be.
Yep.
But also, so about the lights, did your family have a bunch of lights?
We had a few. My dad didn't like putting out lights.
Okay.
It was a lot of work, and it was cold.
Okay, yeah.
But my mom would always make sure we had the Christmas tree in the living room window so you could see it from the driveway. And she'd make sure the back, we can't just decorate the front side of the tree. We got to decorate the back side of the tree, make sure it looks nice from outside the window. And we usually had a couple of lights around the front porch. But it's just that warm glow of light. And if you use the cold lights, the really, really like blue lights, that's just wrong. It's already cold. We don't need to make it colder with the lights.
You can't do that.
Warm, comforting lights. I'll make an exception for the colorful lights because they're cheerful, but those cold lights that they now have for the LEDs, no.
Need the warmth.
Yep.
Yeah, you might be saving money with LEDs, but
Yeah. Well, they make warm LEDs now. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then there you go. You have no
you can
excuse.
chain multiple LEDs together, whereas you can only chain like 3 strings of incandescent together.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that's an advantage then. So, technology-wise, that's cool. Well, going into the first question of all the deep stuff here, kind of deep if you want to say it. I don't know, depending on how you look at it.
The serious meat and potatoes.
Oh yes, the meat and potatoes. Yeah, exactly. It makes me kind of hungry for dinner now. Oh, great.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. That's okay. So you have an interesting job because every time you'll say what you do, people have that usual reaction of, "Oh, wow, that's really cool," and that is air traffic controller.
Yep.
So tell us, how did the Lord lead you to doing that? Was that a straight shot? Was that something you? No, I guess not.
No,
okay,
no.
so how did that happen?
So, probably the kickoff event was probably early high school. For Christmas, my grandfather got me Microsoft Flight Simulator and a joystick. And after about 3 months of messing around with that, I was hooked into aviation. There's a common saying among people in aviation, like, it's the moment you fell in love with aviation. It just, you know people who are in aviation because they're walking along, an airplane flies overhead, and they all do this. Because we want to see that airplane, because airplanes are cool, and they're wicked awesome. So I got bitten by that bug then. And general thought in aviation, I'm going to go be a pilot. And that's what I had my sights set on for most of the time through high school, is I'm going to be a pilot. So when it comes time for college, I kind of am picky. I didn't want a state school. I wanted a 4-year degree just so I could have that 4-year degree in case. So in my search, that led me to 3 different schools. Embry-Riddle, which is the big name. They're also the big price. And pretty much everyone that I talked to about it started there and then went someplace else to finish. So wasn't really interested in that. There was another one up in New Hampshire, which was Daniel Webster. Just really wasn't impressed with it when I went up. It's a small school, and it was still pricey because you're up in New England. And then there was Laterno University down in Longview, Texas. And I remember me and my dad, we flew into DFW, drove 2 hours on the highway to Longview. We got in late. We were gonna have the tour the next day. We were like, let's just drive around the campus. And in that time driving around the campus, I just turned to my dad and went, this is where I'm supposed to go. And just knew. But there was also some other plans. Because keep in mind, I'm still thinking I'm going to be a pilot. Then we start getting into the finances of things. Looking into how much am I going to earn when I graduate? How much loan am I going to have to take on? And basically it got down to there was a scholarship that I was eligible for from the school, which would have been a full tuition scholarship. And it's like, okay, if I'm going to be a pilot, I need this scholarship. And I didn't get it. And that's sort of one of the markers on the path that is going to tell a very similar story, because there's a lot of my sights is set on this. This is why I see it. And God goes, no, we're going to change that slightly. And it ends up being better because my backup plan was air traffic control. I just knew it was aviation. I knew it was kind of cool, but I didn't know much about it and just sort of fell into it. And the more, as I was going through my studies, the more I learned about being a pilot versus being an air traffic controller, I went, being an air traffic controller is a much better fit for me than being a pilot would. So that's how I got into the degree. Then getting into the job was a whole other story. So the way the school worked is you had an associate's degree in air traffic and a bachelor's degree in air traffic. And there is what's called the CTI program, College Training Initiative. And it was how you applied to the FAA. Generally, at the time I started college, the hiring process was they put out a bid for prior experience. Those are people that worked contract towers or worked in the military and were trying to get in the FAA. They filled all the slots with those people. Then if they had remaining slots, they'd open up for the CTI program, fill with that. And then in the rare chance they didn't fill the slots from that, they would do an off-the-street bid where 3 years of progressive work experience or a 4-year degree, come and apply. That was the process when I went in. And you always doubled majored. You majored in the associates and you majored in the bachelor's, because once you got the associates, you could start applying to the FAA. And if you got picked up with the FAA before you finished your 4-year degree, hey, just go. You got a job. You're good. So the third year when I was going to get my associate's degree, be able to apply, we had sequestration. And towers started having to let people go. And they stopped hiring. So I had that little bit. Then sequestration ends, and they're going, we're going to change the hiring process. All you guys who took this test, there's a test that you have to take, and it feels really weird to take, because you go into this testing center with all these people who are like taking their tests for electrical or plumbing, and they got these big old books that they're studying, and you go in and it looks like you're playing a video game. Because they're testing soft skills like memorization, mental math, ability to prioritize things. And that's what they're testing for. So all you guys, you took this test, we're dumping your scores. Your applications are dumped from the system. You got to go through. We got this new test. And also, CTIs are no longer receiving any preference. You're mixed in with all the off-the-street hires. And it became very, very hard to get in as a CTI for a little bit. So I'm coming up to my fourth year in graduation. While I was at school, I worked in IT, videography, and I'm taking a support call with one of the other departments, setting up to assist with some videography that they were needing to do. And at the end of the call, the person on the other line who's in charge of that department goes, "So you're graduating this year?" "Yep." "You're air traffic control, right?" "Yep." "So you're going to need a job, aren't you?" It's like, yeah, I am. I'm trying to figure that out. "Well, hey, would you like to work for me?" And it was this moment of awkward, like, I'm working. You are part of the school, but it feels like getting a job offer from a customer while you're working for somebody else. It was just a little bit awkward, but it worked. And I did that job for about 3 years. I was good at it, but I wasn't passionate about it. It was education. It was interesting. There was stuff in there that I would have never learned had I not been in there. But to make it a career, it would involve me going into education that I just wasn't passionate about. And during that time, that was a decent little bit, because I was at the school. All my friends had graduated, moved away. I knew Longview was not where I was going to be long term, so I was hesitant to put down roots, because I knew I was going to move at some point. I even bought my furniture for my apartment with what is easy to disassemble and pack and move. And so for 3 years, I was sort of in a state of limbo. And that was, during that time, the bit that sort of kept me going is every day was, and it took a while to get there. It wasn't immediate. And it still wasn't easy. But I had to wake up every morning, and I basically had a saying that I ran through my head, which is, "God, I know this is not where I'm going to be long term. I know this is not where my passion is, but I know you have me here for a reason. Help me to see that reason. And if it's not for me to see, then let me live it out and do what you have me to do here." So I went for 3 years with that. Finally got taken in to the FAA. And once you get hired by the FAA, it takes about a year to start working for the FAA because of all the bureaucracy, all the psychological exams, medical exams, background check. It's a long process. Went to the FAA Academy, which that was one of the most trying points for me. It's very stressful. It's designed to stress you out. It's designed to push you to your limit. And so we go through AT Basics. That's easy. That's all book knowledge. Then we do tabletops and simple sims. That's also good. And then we get into the real sims or simulators.
Okay.
And they're designed to be out of your reach. They specifically, near the end, were like, yeah, every problem is designed to be about 2 problems ahead of where you're at. And I'm in my end of the first week, and I got planes crashing left and right. And I'm stressed out. And I am going to bed, dreaming about crashing airplanes, not getting a good night's sleep, coming in even more tired, messing up even more, and it's just this loop. And then I go to the weekend, go to church, and just lay it all to God. There's a prayer that I both prayed and I would say I was given, of sort of just surrendering the future and everything to God. And I have that up in my house near the entryway because it's one of those touchstone things that I want to constantly be reminded of, because it's not, for me, it's not just in that moment, it's that lesson. And that's why I started talking with all those touchstones. It's the idea of God has the future insight. He knows what his plan is, and you need to be okay with it. And all the way from high school when I got first bitten by that bug to now working at PDK Airport and being an air traffic controller, every single one of those steps, there's a moment of that, and it's even more. And I joked, it was every time it's like, God's right, great, you got this down. Now let's push a little bit further. Great, you got this down. Let's push a little bit more. See if you can trust me a little bit more with things. It's like, can I just have a break for a little bit? Nope.
What is that prayer that you mentioned?
If you give me a sec, I can pull it up
Sure.
real quick.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So a little bit, it's a mix of a prayer and poetry. When I'm going through hard times, and also it's one of the things that I think is sort of a gift that God's given me is I will wake up or I will just be walking and I will have an image hit me, and then there will be words to that image, and that is so that's what this is. I was in church, I was stressed out, I was praying, and then this sort of came, and then the words came, and I just wrote it down. So Lord, as I walk down this path, you have provided a light to my feet, but I strain and yearn to see beyond what you have shown me. Peering into the dark unknown, I lose sight of what you have shown and set before me. I cling desperately to my plans and desires among the storm of uncertainty, and like a sinking ship, they drag me down below the waves. Yet you call me to let go and cling and hope in only you. Lord, you set the universe in motion with but your voice. All that you created, a reflection of your glory and power. You knew me before I was formed and planned my days out before they began. Out of love, you sacrificed your own son to save my rebellious heart. You gave me the gifts and talents to achieve the task you set before me. Lord, in your power, love, and grace, I will find peace. I will take each step each day, trusting that you know the path ahead. I will let go and cling to only you, for you are far sweeter than anything that I have. In your power, I will find a peace that will not fail and a rock upon which I can stand.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Was that something you wrote, or is that something that...
That is, like I said, it's hard because I wrote it.
Right.
They're not my words.
Okay.
They're, like I said, it's the image that came and the words that came with it. And like I said, I feel like that's one of the ways that God speaks to my heart is through those things. And so that's the way I'd say I wrote it.
Yeah.
It's original to me.
Right.
But it's not my words.
Okay. Gotcha. Well, that's beautiful words. I mean, I really like it. I think that can be an encouragement for all of us to be just constantly mindful of. I know the one for me that's been very helpful, you may have heard of it, the Serenity Prayer. And I can't quote it verbatim, but it's basically like, Lord, like, grant me the wisdom to see what I can do, and also the wisdom to see what I cannot do. And I think it's like the discernment or the wisdom to see the difference. There are things that we have within our control, like how we respond to things, or but then I would say like the majority of everything in our lives is not in our control. The majority of what happens is not in our control, and we have to give that up to the Lord. And so I thank you so much for sharing that story of like how you just, the plan you had was this, but actually now it's that, and that's actually better. And that's something that, so I appreciate you sharing that. That's really good. So in your job now, in your position of being, again, working at the airport, and having to, again, just manage all the flights. I mean, obviously you or yourself are not managing all the flights, but just being a team of people doing that. What does it mean to be a Christian in that kind of environment, in your position? How do you live out your faith, or how do you see that?
And I think that sort of breaks into two separate questions.
Okay.
How do I embody the characteristics of a Christian in my work? And then also, how do I seek to share God in my work?
Sure.
So I think the characteristics in my work, one of the cores for me is, and I can't quote it verbatim just like that,
Yeah.
but the verse is basically work as if unto God and not unto man.
Yeah.
And that concept of the work I do, I need to make sure I'm acting like God is my boss. Now, that's not to say my boss is God.
Right.
Their word isn't, I have to follow God. I'm not going to be taken advantage of, but I'm going to make sure I'm doing my best. I'm going to make sure I'm have integrity with what I do. I'm going to make sure I'm gracious with what I do. So just that general attitude to work is sort of my foundation. And then more specific in air traffic controllers are a certain breed of people. You have to be to do the job. You have to be confident in yourself. You have to know your stuff. You have to be able to think quick and speak with authority. And that also has negatives. You talk to any air traffic controller, the sense you're going to get is that they have never messed up a day in their lives. We've all messed up. They're luckily, and this is not to disparage, because you've probably seen some stuff in the news about air traffic. There are some issues, but there is a lot of safety nets. And when we mess up, it's we crossed one line. There is a huge margin of safety, but we've crossed into that margin, and we treat that as if we've fully gone past the line. So when I say we all mess up, we've made mistakes. Half the time the people on the airplane wouldn't know because of all the additional safety and redundancy. But we've made mistakes. But we have to pretend like we don't because we have to have that confidence in ourselves.
I can see that.
So it's an interesting mix of, I have to have that confidence, but I also need to have humility because that's a core of being a Christian.
Right.
So it's a balance like that. And then as far as sharing God in the workplace, it's more relational. So just like we are super busy sometimes, you work an hour and it feels like 15 minutes went by because you are so busy. Other times though, like a couple days ago when it was cloudy, weekend, not a lot of people flying, you're sitting there with nothing to do. And what do we do to pass the time? A lot of the time we talk. And I find the way I would put it is being clearly a Christian, but not aggressively being a Christian.
Okay.
Everyone at my work knows I'm a Christian because I'll be like, yeah, on Sunday at church I was doing this or this, but it's not I don't know if you've seen Community.
Okay.
I think it's Sheila's the character, but there's certain moments where it's that stereotypical played up for laughs Christian, like, you got to read the Bible, and hammering people.
Right.
And so in those conversations, things come up. Conversations come up. Discussions happen because people know I'm a Christian. And they open the door. So, and they go as far as they're wanting to go with those conversations. And then we'll shift. But each time it's a little bit deeper and a little bit more.
I'm curious about something in particular because what you were talking about, I was thinking of a question that was like going back to like the whole, God's sovereign over everything. And I wonder if you yourself notice a difference between how you think about your job and how others who may not be Christians will think about their jobs, because you're doing something that can be extraordinarily stressful and you're having to manage things that are very dangerous potentially. I mean, granted, like you said, there are a lot of safety measures, but still it's something where if you didn't have any peace about, like, if you really thought like everything's up to me, I have to make sure that everything's a certain way, rather than coming in with the mindset you have from your faith of saying like, I'm going to do the best I can, not be lazy, but do the best I can. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I know that God is really the one in control here. So how does anyone else notice that you have a little bit more peace about that? Or
maybe part of it, the stress of the job doesn't really come from because that's what a lot of people from outside think is the stress of the job is, I got these people's lives in my hand. That's 50 people. That's 100 people. And I got to make, it's not as that dramatic.
Okay.
The stress of the job comes from you're constantly on guard. You're constantly watching. You're constantly in an alert state, and that wears you down over the long term. It's not very rarely you have these high peaks of stress. It's a constant low level
Okay.
being on alert. So there's not so much to deal with that. So I would say people probably don't notice. And I'll be honest, in my day to day, I do carry the weight of I am responsible. Yeah, God's in charge. And if it's his will that 2 planes hit, I'm not going to be able to stop it. But that's not how I'm going to approach it.
I
I'm
understand.
going to approach it of I have this responsibility. I am responsible. And I need to do everything I can. Luckily, I have not had to work a fatality. I've come in behind fatalities. It's a lot. Even coming in behind a fatal crash, I've had to take time off just because of the emotional weight of it.
Right. And have you, sorry to interrupt a little bit there, but have you, so if you're coming in and something has already happened where someone else was currently there when that kind of situation happened, have you been able to provide any comfort to them and I don't know how exactly, but has that been
somewhat? It's usually after the fact because when it happens, they're down in the offices.
Okay.
There's what's called CISM team, Critical Incident Stress Management team.
Okay.
That's put on between the FAA and the union that people are trained and they do the initial debrief, but it still lingers and still. And so being that person that someone can talk to and listening.
right?
Yeah. It's more so going where the person's is willing to go. And the times it's happened, the people, they've wanted to talk about it, but they're not telling them, oh, God's in control and this. They're not going to be open to receiving that.
Gotcha.
They just need someone to sit and listen and have compassion over the feelings that they're going through.
That's
and
important.
what they're dealing with.
Yeah.
So that's how it's been in those times.
Okay. That's good. And I think I don't really have anything else I can think to probe any further into that. So I appreciate just the candid nature of like explaining how that works. Cause I know I would definitely fall into the mindset, like you said, the stereotype of like, oh, it's so stressful all the time. But I understand it, like you're saying, it's more of a constant vigilance. It's a constant like, have to make sure, have to be looking, have to be checking everything. So while I, as one of many public, even if I never travel through the airport myself, I appreciate what you do. I know we need our air traffic controllers, and especially you think about how many flights happen. I mean, because you work at a smaller airport, and of course there's the larger Atlanta airport, and that is, as far as I know, it is, I think, still technically the busiest airport.
Busiest by passenger volume for Hartsfield, yep.
Okay.
And to be clear, I'm not at Hartsfield.
Right.
I'm at a smaller airport to the north, but we are the second busiest in Georgia.
Okay.
And we handle all the corporate flights, a lot of flight training, all the news helicopters. We do on average about 500 to 600 operations a day. Okay. And to put that in context, Hartsfield is, I think, like 1,700 operations a day.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's...
If not higher. I've not looked at their numbers, but we're like here, they're like there.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing because whenever I'll go there, and it's just really cool to see the logistics of everything, of how everything works. It's such a well-oiled machine. When you could say,
I'm glad it looks that way.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not really that way. Oh.
Well, no, it is. It is. But there's so much that goes on behind the scenes. For the average person, you're sitting down. That's if you want to have a fun time. Dig into how many people have a hand on your flight before you even get on the airplane. The dispatchers, the air traffic controllers, the pilots, the crew, the maintenance people. There is so much complexity in the system, and it does run like a well-oiled machine, but there are so many moving parts to keep track of that all have to come together to make things go off without a hitch.
I think that brings up actually a pretty good point for us as believers, is like to think of as complex as all that is, in terms of living out our faith. I think it's just how we treat people, how we treat, and to not be again, the airport can be a very stressful place of if anything goes wrong at all, any delays, it's just people can turn into monsters.
Yep.
And we as believers can't do that. We must be just gracious and kind and understanding even when crazy stuff happens, and understanding that the employees themselves, who we're talking to will probably have no direct control over something that may have happened. So treating people with respect is something we just have to always be mindful of, and always be, that can be us living out our faith and being like Christ, and not being demanding of our rights, and like, oh, how dare you, I need to speak to, I demand this, I demand that.
We can't be the Christian in the parking lot of the church having road rage over someone as we're trying to get out to get to lunch.
That's hilarious. Hey, you're just leaving a sermon talking about like, okay, be kind to everybody, and you're going, yeah.
My sister worked in the restaurant business, and they did not look forward to the church rush lunch. That was you didn't want to work those tables.
Yeah, I know. And actually, this brings up an interesting story. Kind of an aside, but it's very applicable to the overall conversation, living our faith. And that was when we were still early as a church, when we were meeting in our current space. I don't know if you heard this, but I think it was on Facebook. Someone like posted a bad review. And they said, hey, your church members didn't leave a tip, I think, at a restaurant. And it wasn't even us. And we tried to contact them. It was like, no, that wasn't us. We didn't do that. But yeah, to your point, I mean, whenever we as a church body, whenever we as a friend group goes out for a meal, you make sure that you treat the server very well. You are not demanding. You're not rude at all, because, again, I think I've said this before, is like, you will absolutely obliterate your witness if you do that. If you go there after church and you're saying, and you're praying before the meal, and everyone, people working there know, oh, this is a church group, and if you don't treat them very well, that is going to speak louder than your words.
But the caution I put on that is, you have to shift the mindset. You can't think of, I need to do this to protect my witness, because that puts it on you. That's a self-centered thought. It needs to be a thought of, I need to do this because I need to show this person love.
True.
I don't know what they've gone through today.
I would agree with that.
I don't know what's going on the rest of their day.
Yep.
But I have an opportunity, however small, to show this person love in my interaction with them.
Yeah.
And I need to do that.
Absolutely. And that's really what I was kind of going for. But yeah. I
agree. But it's just that tiny little shift in mindset that's so easy to flip the other way.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good. So, and then moving on from that, so in other spheres of life, in terms of just being, again, a member of our church, in terms of the people you interact with, and this really goes into a whole other part of your life, I'd say, which is how you interact with, because you're very much into D&D.
Yep.
And how and what's going on with that in terms of like, currently, or maybe in the past, of like how you're able to, again, just witness and just be a good Christian example to people who may not be members of churches.
It's kind of similar to my work. So I love D&D. I love the storytelling for those Dungeons and Dragons. And I do what's called, I'm the dungeon master for most of my games, which means I'm the one that's telling the story that all the other people interact with. I'm all the characters in the story, and I'm also the referee for the rules and stuff like that. And it's something I love. And so one of the challenges I had early on is the idea of, well, if you have a passion for something, how are you using it for Christ? And what I've sort of landed on is D&D is my mission field. That is where I'm supposed to reach people. There are people who play who would never set foot in a church. They've either had very bad interactions with Christianity, they haven't been exposed to Christianity. Now, that's not the stereotype. There are Christians in there as well. But the large majority have had some sort of rejection in their life. And a lot of the times it's come from Christianity. So there's a lot of hurt and a lot of pain with the church. And so it's that similar thing of not being aggressive. I'm not aggressively Christian, but I am openly Christian. And the conversations that I have been able to have, that I have not started, But that other person has asked, so what do you think happens after we die? What are your thoughts on that? And just talking about life and being able to be there for them. The other thing that I think is really important for me when I go into that is the concept of seeing the other person's point of view. I think it's something that we, in our generation, have somewhat lost. We have this strive for truth. We have this concept of there is truth, and this is truth, and here's the truth, so why don't you see the truth? But you have to take this concept of, even though I know what that person is saying is wrong, what they believe is incorrect, isn't the truth, I still have to understand that point of view. I have to see the world through their eyes, both to have compassion on them and to truly love them, and also to understand where they're coming from so I can engage them there, instead of just slamming truth into a hard wall that they immediately put up. So I think that's an important thing to have when going into that.
That's pretty good. I mean, yeah, because it is important to not just be. We've all probably heard the term of like Bible thumping Christian, of just like slamming, and we know that, I mean, as believers, we can't, and I've thought this for a while, is like, I can't force somebody to believe a certain thing. The only thing that I'm really called to do is to share the good news. I can't make somebody, I don't even have the power. I don't have the spiritual power to be able to convert somebody. It's not possible. But what I can do is just point them to Christ and say like, hey, I know that I need a Savior, and Christ is that Savior, and I would love to, introduce you to Him.
Yeah. And it's also helped me grow as a Christian. A lot of the times what I'm doing at church, what I'm listening to the sermon, is a thought experiment that I'll often run is, okay, if I invited one of my D&D players to this service and they were sitting next to me, what would they be thinking as they hear this sermon? And it helps you dig deeper, because all the comfortable we're sitting in the Christian, but then you shift your view to someone that's not a Christian and look at it. You see things, you ask questions that you normally wouldn't, and it helps you to get a little bit deeper into the meat of what's being said.
That's
to really weigh it out and like, okay, so he's saying this. If someone turned to me and went, why is he saying that? And as opposed to just coming from the place of, yeah, that's what we've always heard. So it's been beneficial in that as well.
That's cool. I've had a similar kind of thought sometimes when I'll see somebody who I know that someone has brought a guest, and I'll be looking at them, I'll be thinking like, oh, I kind of wonder how they're processing this. I wonder if they're like, how they're thinking about this, what they're hearing, and if they're really understanding it, if it's just clicking, because it really has to click. It has to be something that is logically like they're following it, and not just, because you can use complex Christian terms that we may be familiar with, but if you're talking to somebody who's never heard that, then it's like, well, what do you mean by justification or all these really complicated words?
Or, and this is the truth, Christians hold controversial opinions compared to the norm. And when this person says this controversial opinion, I know if I have someone from my D&D group, there's going to be discussion on that. And instead of, like I said, sitting in that comfortable place of, yeah, that makes sense. That's the truth. I know that's the truth. Well, why do I know that's the truth? How can I explain that to someone who thinks the other way?
It kind of forces you to rethink your, not like question necessarily, but just to rethink like, okay, and I think that's helpful, because whenever we're thinking about how to share a faith with anybody, it's sort of like, okay, where are they coming from? If they already have a certain background of a different faith, or just no faith at all, maybe they grew up and they would consider themselves to be maybe atheist or just agnostic. They don't know, and trying to figure out like, okay, how do you get into? Yeah, it is kind of tricky, because the gospel really should be always the same message, but I guess it's how you
express it.
Yeah, it can be different. So I think that's really, really good. And then, so moving on from that category, I'd like to ask you near the end as we wrap up here, is there a particular cause or a nonprofit that you're aware of that you would like to share with everybody?
So I'm an aviation nut. One of the things that my school specialized in is what's called missions aviation. There's two predominant groups that do this, MAF, Mission Aviation, I think it's Fellowship, and JARS, Jungle Aviation Radio Service. And they're a logistical support for missionaries in the field. But they also carry out outreach through running medical missions. They operate in these areas where they can get someone from their tribe or a village to care or to the city in an hour or a couple minutes when it would have taken days of trekking through mountains to get there. And they provide this service and outreach and ministry through that. And also through this, they're able to get inroads into places where missionaries aren't necessarily welcome, but they provide such a vital service that sometimes eyes get turned or sometimes they're just able to get in. And it's not that well known of a mission field unless you're in the aviation sphere and are a Christian. So those would be the two that I would call attention to is MAF and JARS. It's a very unique opportunity to support missionary work.
And so I've seen things similar to this. I'm not sure if these particular organizations, but is that the kind of thing where they're like delivering, I think, like supplies and stuff?
Yeah, it can be supplies. It can be supporting a village by enabling them to bring goods to the market and bring up the welfare. It can be like JARS partners a lot with Wycliffe.
Okay. Yeah.
Bible translators who are out in the bush and they need that logistical support of food, medicine, gear, supplies, and communication with the outside world. So these guys are supporting the missionaries as they're doing their work in more remote areas that aren't as easily accessed.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I know because our church supports Wycliffe Bible translators. So, and was it JARS or was it the other one that you said works with Wycliffe, or are they both?
I believe it's JARS.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'll definitely link, both those organizations, below in the description so people can check those out and maybe even, support them. And because that's all. There's so many vital causes out there. Even when I was talking in episode 1, and we were talking about all these different organizations. There's so many out there. And I guess to reiterate something I said in episode 1 with Mike, is that there is such great need out there. There's so many different causes out there. So it's easy to feel overwhelmed, but I think it's really important is if there's just one particular, like in your case, aviation. So if there may be one particular thing, one particular cause that's really pulling at your heart that God is leading you to, then you can just support that. And you don't have to feel like you support everybody.
Yep.
Just do that one thing, and that's what the Lord is leading you to do to be helpful for the cause of the kingdom. So that's fantastic. Thank you very much for sharing that.
Yep.
And then my very last question is, if you could just say one thing, just kind of briefly, to someone who doesn't know the Lord, what would that be?
Don't look at me. Don't look at the church. We're fallible. We're human. We will fail. That is one of the fundamental things of our faith is we will, and we will continue to fail. We are broken. We are sinful. So don't look at us. Look to the person that we're pointing to. If you've been hurt by the church, if you've had bad experiences with the church, know that that's not Christianity. That is the failing of Christianity. And know that from that, there is that hope. What we stand for is not a list of rules and expectations of us to follow. What we stand for is the idea that we have failed that. We have utterly failed in holding up to that expectation and those rules. But there's someone who offers us grace and forgiveness. And that's what we want to point to.
Tremendous. Well, Ian, really appreciate it. Thank you for your time to be on the podcast here, and appreciate you just sharing the story of, again, how the Lord has led you to where you are now. And once again, thank you. And on behalf of the rest of the public, please say thank you to your fellow coworkers who are keeping the airways safe.
Yep. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to seeing this and the other episodes you got coming out.
Tremendous. All right. Well, that's episode 2 there with air traffic controller Ian. And as always, let's just live out our faith in everything we do each day and be just good witnesses for him.